The arrival of a shadow. When John Titor spoke to the world, imagine stumbling upon a message board late at night. One of those obscure corners of the internet where conspiracy theories, science fiction, and forgotten thoughts swirl together. Amid random discussions, a user appears, calm, articulate, oddly precise. His username is John Titor, and he claims to be a soldier sent from the year 2036. Not in a whimsical, wouldn't it be cool kind of way, but in the chillingly direct tone of someone stating a fact. He posts scans of official documents, mechanical schematics, and detailed accounts of the future he claims to have lived through. There is no sales pitch, no attempt at fame, just a man, or something that appears to be one, answering questions about what is to come. And so begins one of the most captivating digital legends of our time. John Titor didn't just arrive. He emerged strategically, anonymously, through posts on forums like Time Travel Institute and Art Bells. It was November 2nd, 2000. From his very first message, he set the tone. Greetings. I am a time traveler from the year 2036. He claimed to be part of a military program under the United States Army, sent back to 1975 to retrieve an IBM 5100 computer, a model, he explained, that possessed unique programming features needed to debug legacy systems in his own time. The specificity was unsettling. Not just because most people had never heard of the IBM 5100's hidden capabilities, but because even engineers from IBM later confirmed those technical details weren't public knowledge. How did he know? What separates John Titor from countless internet hoaxes is the extraordinary level of coherence in his narrative. Over the course of 4 months, Titor answered hundreds of questions. His language was clean, technical, even emotionally detached at times, not the style of someone spinning fiction for attention. He spoke of his world, not with awe or drama, but with the weary tone of a man who had lived through it. According to Titor, the United States in the early 2000s was on the verge of a deepening divide. Political instability would lead to civil unrest, then war. By 2008, he said, America would split into 5 regions, each with its own system of governance. A second civil war, he predicted, would devastate the country and lead to the eventual rise of a new federal government based in Omaha, Nebraska. These statements, made before the rise of major social divides and political polarization, struck a haunting chord in later years. The emotional power of Titor's story wasn't in the technology or even the predictions. It was in the subtle terror of inevitability. He painted a world where truth had become fluid, where facts were weaponized, and where survival depended not on innovation but on isolation and loyalty. He described a generation that had grown up in the shadow of broken cities and poisoned skies, where children learned to shoot before they learned to write. He did not glamorize the future. He presented it as a logical outcome of choices we hadn't even realized we were making. And as he answered questions about time travel mechanics, about world lines, divergence ratios, and the role of black holes in temporal displacement, it became difficult to separate theory from testimony. It wasn't just what he said. It was how little he asked for in return. He shared images, one of the most famous being a photo, allegedly showing his time machine embedded inside a 1967 Chevrolet Corvette. The device, called a C-204 gravity distortion unit, supposedly used to singularities to manipulate gravity and create a controlled Kerr black hole. The technical jargon, again, was precise. He provided diagrams with labels, timelines of divergence, and even manuals for operation. Skeptics dismissed it as science fiction masquerading as fact, yet others pointed out the surprising level of scientific alignment with real theories in general relativity and quantum gravity. Titor never claimed to be a scientist. He claimed to be a soldier trained to operate a machine. The simplicity of that role made it more believable. He didn't have all the answers. He had a mission, but there was a deeper hook buried in the machinery. The human longing for warning that someone, anyone, might care enough about the past to return and say, "Prepare." Titor answered personal questions with a calm sincerity that unnerved many. He wrote about the loss of his brother in a future conflict, the death of cities we still live in, the breakdown of communication between people who once shared the same country. When asked if there was hope, his response was always the same. For some, yes. For others, no. Hope, in his world, was not universal. It was conditional, earned through resilience, not granted by luck. The community around Titor began to grow. People analyzed every word, cross-referenced historical patterns, and debated the paradoxes of time travel. He warned against seeking confirmation in mainstream history because, he said, he came not from our exact timeline, but a parallel one. According to Titor, time travel doesn't alter the past in your universe. It creates new world lines with small divergences. Therefore, even if his predictions didn't all come true, it didn't mean he was lying. It meant we were not the version of Earth he came from. That single concept allowed his narrative to remain unfalsifiable, yet plausible. It made him immune to debunking. Every missed prediction could be explained by deviation. Every strange coincidence attributed to drift. It was genius, or it was real. Then, just as suddenly as he had arrived, John Titor disappeared. His last post was on March 24, 2001. No farewell, no final warning, just silence. The forums remained. The speculation intensified. Years later, journalists, scientists, and skeptics would try to trace his identity. Theories emerged. Some claimed it was a complex art project. Others suspected a coordinated hoax by multiple people. One private investigator pointed to a Florida-based lawyer and his brother, suggesting they may have created the persona for marketing purposes. But no one has ever definitively proven who John Titor was or is. And that's what haunts us. Not whether he was telling the truth, but the possibility that he might have been. The physics of paradox. Time travel, according to John Titor, time travel, in most narratives, comes wrapped in fantasy. A swirling portal, a flash of light, a leap into the past or future, with little regard for the mechanics behind it. But John Titor approached the subject with a curiously methodical clarity. His account wasn't cloaked in metaphors or visual spectacle. Instead, he laid out a functional framework rooted in known scientific theories, filtered through a lens of military. If his story was a hoax, it was a meticulously engineered one. If it was truth, it came dressed in the strange language of relativity, divergence, and quantum probability, a language eerily aligned with emerging models in modern physics. Titor's time machine, as he described it, wasn't some abstract wormhole or whimsical device. It was a gravity-controlled unit installed inside a 1967 Chevrolet Corvette, later moved to a truck for stability, officially named the C-204 Gravity Distortion Unit. It was said to use two microsingularities, miniature black holes, stabilized by exotic matter, to bend gravity and manipulate time. The machine operated by creating a Tipler sinusoid. a concept loosely derived from the theoretical Tipler cylinder, a hypothetical object that, if rotated at near light speed, could twist space-time around itself. In Titor's account, the unit generated a static Kerr field, the rotational force around a singularity, and used it to displace the vehicle in time, not just in space. He spoke of precise controls, onboard computers, divergent sensors. It felt less like science fiction, and more like a classified technical briefing. The idea of using black holes for time travel isn't new. It echoes the work of physicists like Kip Thorne and Stephen Hawking, who explored how extreme gravitational fields could warp space-time. But the complexity and stability required to harness such forces remain, by all accounts, beyond current human capability. Titor's machine, however, wasn't built in 2000. It was, he claimed, manufactured in 2034 by General Electric for use by military operatives tasked with recovering vital technology from the past. This origin positioned the machine in a future where physics had matured past current constraints, yet Titor's knowledge of the underlying principles was detailed enough to withstand a degree of scrutiny from engineers and hobbyists alike. He even offered equations referencing time displacement, mass vectors, and temporal drift in ways that seemed oddly consistent with real-world physics, or at least with speculative extensions of it. But perhaps more fascinating than the machine itself was the theoretical framework Titor used to justify the nature of his travel. According to him, time travel does not affect the traveler's original timeline. Instead, it moves them into a nearby parallel world line, a universe similar to their own, but with slight differences. He described the multiverse not as a fantasy, but as a fundamental structure of reality. Every decision, every quantum fluctuation, creates a branching universe. The moment you leave your original time, you enter another strand of reality, diverging by a measurable ratio. Titor claimed his divergence meter ensured that he had not strayed more than 2.5% from his native world line. That meant that although history might appear identical on the surface, subtle and eventually not so subtle changes would emerge. This concept served a dual function. It provided a logical structure for how time travel could work, and it offered a built-in safeguard against contradiction. If someone asked why his predictions didn't come true, Titor could simply point to divergence. He wasn't here to change our world. He was here to borrow from it. According to his logic, the mere act of arriving here altered events just enough to create a new timeline, one where our outcomes would differ from his. That explanation protected his story from easy debunking. But more than that, it offered a terrifying glimpse into a universe where certainty is an illusion, where cause and effect are no longer tethered by linearity, but float in a sea of probability, where every choice fractures reality. Titor also spoke of the paradoxes often associated with time travel and dismissed them as irrelevant in a multiverse model. The grandfather paradox, in which a traveler goes back in time and kills their ancestor, thereby preventing their own birth, posed no problem. In Titor's worldview, such an action would simply create a new branch of reality, one where the traveler was never born, but the original world line, the one they came from, remained unchanged. In this model, you cannot erase your own existence, but you can cause the emergence of entirely new futures. It's a chilling notion that the universe is vast enough to contain infinite versions of you, some doomed by choices you'll never make, others blessed by mistakes you avoided. What disturbed many readers at the time, and continues to disturb them, is not just that Titor's model fits within the realm of speculative physics, but that it anticipates ideas that became more mainstream after he vanished. The notion of a multiverse, once relegated to science fiction, is now a serious topic in quantum theory and cosmology. The many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, proposed by Hugh Everett in the 1950s, suggests that all possible outcomes of quantum measurements become real in separate, non-communicating branches of the universe. Titor's divergence theory mirrored this almost exactly. He was not simply regurgitating science fiction tropes. He was constructing, or revealing, a system of time travel that aligned disturbingly well with advanced theoretical models. But perhaps the most haunting idea he left behind was this: certainty is an illusion. If Titor was right, then history is not fixed. The future is not predictable. Reality is not singular. There is no ultimate timeline to protect, no sacred continuity to preserve. Every moment births countless others. Every decision opens a rift. In such a reality, truth becomes relative, not morally, but physically. There is no definitive answer, only local ones. The past is solid only in memory, the future forever fluid. It is this foundation, more than any prediction or machine diagram, that keeps John Titor alive in our collective imagination. He wasn't just a traveler, he was a philosopher of time. Whether hoax or harbinger, he forced us to confront a terrifying possibility that we are not the center of the universe, not even of our own story, merely one thread in an infinite weave of time. Echoes through the net, the cultural afterlife of John Titor. When John Titor disappeared from the forums in 2001, he left behind no farewell, no dramatic send-off, just silence. But that silence did not end the story, it only deepened the mystery. What followed was not a fading of interest, but a transformation. Titor's presence began to evolve into something more than a forum thread or an internet oddity. He became a symbol not just of time travel, but of a deeper, more unsettling anxiety that defines our digital age. He became the ghost in the machine, the traveler we all suspected might be real. It started subtly. Archive hunters preserved every line he wrote. Users passed through his grammar, his tone, his use of technical terms. Discussion boards emerged, entirely dedicated to Titor's claims, not just to debate their authenticity, but to decode them like ancient scripture. People began treating his posts as if they held secret meanings, veiled prophecies, and encrypted warnings. The analytical obsession mirrored religious study. He wasn't just a user anymore. He was a phenomenon. Over time, Titor became woven into internet folklore, alongside the likes of Slender Man and the Backrooms, but with a key difference. His story came before the viral age. He didn't ride the wave of YouTube, TikTok, or Reddit. He predated them, and yet he survived them. This persistence speaks to something deeper than fascination with the paranormal. It reveals a hunger, a psychological longing for someone to make sense of the chaos. Titor didn't offer peace, he offered structure. In a world increasingly shaped by noise, by disinformation, by political fracture and emotional fatigue, his voice was paradoxically calm. He did not shout, he did not beg to be believed, he simply stated. And in that subtle tone, he gave people a sense of order, a timeline, a map, even if that map ended in collapse. As internet culture evolved, so did Titor's mythos. Documentaries were made, books were written. Artists created entire digital exhibitions based on his machine diagrams. And time. Podcast hosts and YouTube creators resurrected his story, not just to retell it, but to relive it, to once again step into the uncanny space between fiction and belief. Titor became an archetype, the lone wanderer from a shattered future, returning not to save us, but to warn us. That archetype hit something primal, because at our core, humans are storytellers, and we crave stories that feel too detailed, too eerie, too coherent to be dismissed. In many ways, Titor anticipated the modern internet, before fake news became a political weapon. He blurred the lines between reality and fabrication with unnerving precision. He predicted a future shaped by division, where truth would fragment across screens and timelines. And unlike most conspiracy figures, Titor didn't profit from fame. He didn't try to sell books or merchandise. He didn't monetize his following, because there was none. He existed in a quieter era of the web, where influence was measured not by likes, but by lingering doubt. That gave his story a kind of purity, whether real or staged. It wasn't commercial. It was existential. The psychological impact of Titor's story is not unlike that of religious prophecy or dystopian fiction. It gives us a mirror, not to the future, but to our own anxieties. He described a world plagued by disease, war, misinformation, and technological dependency. He painted a portrait of America divided not by borders, but by belief. And then the years passed, and we watched those beliefs calcify. We watched algorithms replace discourse. We watched families fracture over ideologies. And suddenly, Titor didn't sound like a fiction anymore. He sounded like a delayed echo, not from the future, but from the direction we were already heading. Perhaps that's the most haunting part. Not that Titor predicted everything with precision, but that we began to move toward the shape of his world, not because of time travel, but because of something far more terrifying: human nature. Our tendency to repeat mistakes, our addiction to conflict, our slow, unconscious drift toward entropy. In that sense, Titor wasn't a prophet. He was a reflection, and in him we saw not what would happen, but what could happen if nothing changed. And then there's the aesthetic legacy. Titor didn't just leave behind ideas, he left behind imagery. The grainy photo of his alleged time machine, the stark IBM 5100 terminal, the scans of technical manuals. These objects, mundane on their own, became infused with meaning. They became relics. Today, they circulate like digital artifacts, used in music videos, vaporwave art, and cyberpunk visuals. They symbolize a strange nostalgia for a future that never arrived, a future that feels lost. Not because it didn't happen, but because we missed the warning. John Titor represents the thin line between narrative and belief, between science and myth. His story is a template, one that has inspired ARG's alternate reality games, fictional prophets, and elaborate online puzzles. But none have captured the same lingering unease. None have walked that fine wire between plausibility and madness so convincingly. Titor remains untouchable because he never revealed his face, never demanded loyalty, never overstayed his welcome. He arrived, he spoke, he vanished, and in that vanishing, he became permanent. What does it say about us that we still search for him? That forums still light up with new theories, new evidence, new comparisons between Titor's timeline and our own. Perhaps it says that we don't just want to believe in time travel. We want to believe we were warned. We want to think that someone, somewhere, cared enough to come back, not to save us, but to tell us the truth, one last time. Beyond the clock, the existential weight of the time traveler. Time travel is often framed as adventure, a cinematic rush through wormholes, a rebellion against the arrow of time. But if we strip away the spectacle, the glowing machines, the spiraling visuals, we are left with something much colder, much quieter: isolation, displacement, a life lived out of sync with the world. And this is where the myth of John Titor reaches beyond science and enters the realm of something far more unsettling: the psychological condition of being unstuck in time, a state of existence where memory becomes unreliable and the present is always a question. Titor didn't describe the future with wonder. He spoke of it as a soldier might describe a battlefield, with respect, distance, and grief. His voice, even in digital form, carried a strange kind of weight, not just because of what he said, but how he said it. There was no urgency, no attempt to persuade. It was as if he had long accepted that no one would fully believe him, and yet he spoke anyway. Because belief wasn't the point. His mission was not to convince, but to warn. And in that warning, there was a kind of loneliness that transcended the boundaries of his claims. Whether Titor was a real traveler or an illusion crafted by a brilliant mind, he captured the emotional cost of seeing the world from outside its timeline, of returning to a past that doesn't belong to you anymore, of walking among people who are doomed to repeat choices you've already seen unravel. It's the voice of someone who has stopped asking to be understood and simply watches. Imagine what that would mean: to carry the burden of memory that no one else shares, to remember a city that no longer exists, a person who never lived, a victory that never came. If time is not linear, then loss is not either. It multiplies. Titor alluded to this subtly. In fragments, he mentioned the death of a brother, but did not mourn. He described the fragmentation of countries, but without anger. He spoke of the dismantling of institutions, but without nostalgia. His detachment wasn't cold, it was exhausted, as if he had already felt all the emotions the future could offer, and returned with only the duty to inform. This is, perhaps, the most haunting element of his story. Not the technology, not the predictions, but the emotional flattening of someone who has seen too many versions of the same ending. In his world, history repeats not because we forget it, but because it no longer matters that we remember. Each choice, each decision simply spawns a new line. There is no final draft, no definitive truth, only drift. And what is a traveler in such a universe, if not a ghost? Someone who exists in the margins, touching lives that will never remember. Him, watching a world make choices he's already seen fail. This idea of witnessing time from the outside evokes something deeply good. The confrontation with the eternal archetype of the wanderer, the stranger from outside the village, who carries knowledge the collective isn't ready to hear. He is the modern version of the prophet, the madman, the visionary. But in Titor's case, he doesn't bring divine wisdom or mythic poetry. He brings math and blueprints and static divergence ratios. The future he describes isn't symbolic, it's procedural. That makes it colder, but it also makes it harder to dismiss. And yet, there's a strange kind of hope buried within it all. Not the Hollywood kind, not rescue, not redemption, but agency. Titor never claimed that disaster was inevitable, only that it was likely, unless we changed. He offered no miracle cures, no secret answers, only choices. He insisted that individual resilience mattered, that in his time, people lived in small communities, trusted one another, grew their own food. He spoke of a return to locality, to simplicity, to meaning earned through hardship. It was not a utopia, but it was a survival, and perhaps that's what made his warnings resonate. He didn't try to save the world. He told us how to endure. There's a cruelty in that kind of hope, the kind that doesn't spare you from the storm, but teaches you how to walk through it. Titor's legacy is full of that paradox. He left behind a roadmap without a destination, instructions without reassurance, warnings without judgment, and then he was gone. Not with a bang, not with closure, but with absence. And that silence became part of the myth, because in a world addicted to resolution, his disappearance was the most powerful message he could send. He left just enough behind to haunt us, just enough to make us wonder, what if it was real? This is the question that lingers. Not because we expect him to return, but because the possibility remains. What if he comes back, not as a forum post, not as a grainy image, but as a person standing in the street wearing a faded uniform, holding an outdated device, looking at us with the calm of someone who has seen this moment before? What would we ask him? Would we beg him to tell us what happens next? Or would we finally understand that the answer doesn't matter? That the future isn't a script to be read, it's a mirror, and that everything we fear or hope or avoid is already inside us. John Titor may never return. Maybe he was never here. But his presence, digital, spectral, unresolved, continues to whisper across timelines. Not because he claimed to come from the future, but because he made us feel, for just a moment, like the future was watching us back.